I call this meeting to order. This is the regular meeting of the Northfield Public School Board. Today is Monday, May 8th, 2023, and the time is 6 p.m. This meeting is being live streamed and recorded. The recording of this meeting will be posted on the district website as soon as possible. Welcome members of the community here tonight to observe the important work being done on behalf of all school district stakeholders, and welcome to the District Youth Council and Malia Fullen. Dr. Hillman, we have some items in the table file.
Yes, we have several items in the table file this evening. We do have the slide deck for the District Youth Council presentation to the board. I did send that to board members on Friday. It's also included in the table file. We have a few gift agreements. We have a couple of appointments, some increased, decreased, change in assignment, a leave of absence, and several retirements, resignations. And so that is the table file for this evening.
Okay, thank you. If there are no objections, we will add these items to the agenda as we move forward. Is there a motion to approve the agenda as presented? Moved by Jeff, second. By Amy. All those in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed? Okay, motion carries. Do we have anyone sign up for public comment? Okay, that was item 3. So we'll skip on to item 4, which is announcements and recognitions. And tonight we'll be recognizing members of the District Youth Council. Okay. Let's see. So tonight we're pleased to honor our District Youth Council seniors for their remarkable work. The District Youth Council works to translate youth voice into action by providing connections between the school board, school administration, and the student body. They gather and provide youth input on school district related issues to the Northfield Board of Education, district administration, and other school related entities. District Youth Council members also serve on various committees throughout the district. And we have 2 seniors that we'll be recognizing tonight. So if you will step forward, I will read your bios and present you with a certificate. Grace Ryden and Lida Prestamon. Great. If you'll stand right here in front of the screen, we'll get the camera on you and I will read some of your bio details, and then I have a certificate for you. Also absent is Chloe Zhao. Okay, for Grace, here's the question that we asked. List the DYC subcommittees and district committees you have served on, and there are a number of them for Grace. Served on the Equity and Inclusion Subcommittee for 2 years. One of those years serving as a co-leader, and this year served as the co-chair of DYC. And her district commitment for all 3 years has been Northfield Forward. For Lida, is it Leda? Lida. For Lida, District Youth Council Communication Subcommittee and District Student Wellness Committee. I asked them what their future plans are, or we asked them what their future plans will be. And Grace plans to attend Lawrence University and major in environmental studies and study music at the Lawrence Conservatory. And Lida will be attending Luther College in the fall and planning on studying biology. And then I wanted to hear of a highlight that you'd like to share from your time on DYC, and then also what staff member helped you grow during your time on DYC. And so Grace responded, organizing free period products in the bathrooms at the high school has been one of her favorite projects. And it's been really cool to see and hear how impactful it has been for many students. And they both gave a shout out to Malia as someone who helped them grow and helped them grow during their time at DYC. So we are very pleased to honor you tonight. We're very proud of you. And I'm happy to present you with these certificates. Yes. Thank you, Amy. Very nice. We now have as our first item for discussion and report.
I do have a couple of announcements this evening too.
Sorry about that.
No, you're good. So in addition to the wonderful presentation for our DYC staff, I have 3 announcements. First, we want to congratulate area learning staff members Paul Stanton and Jen Toth. Both Paul and Jen received the Prevention Champion Award this year from Rice County Chemical and Mental Health Coalition. A prevention champion is someone who helps reduce risk factors for alcohol and drug abuse, supports recovery, promotes mental health and well-being, or builds assets for our youth or other community members. So we want to congratulate Paul and Jen for their great work on behalf of kids and for Chemical and Mental Health Coalition Prevention Champion Award. So congratulations to them. We also are just thrilled to share that hundreds, and we mean hundreds of people, students, families, and community members celebrated Cinco de Mayo this past Friday at Northfield Middle School. It was a great celebration of music and culture and food. It featured our students throughout the entire evening, just a wonderful celebration of that event. And we want to congratulate the Cinco de Mayo Scholarship Award winners, who are Ashley Marcial Rodriguez and Daniel De La Torre. And so we congratulate them on their scholarships. And finally, on a sad note, I am deeply saddened to share that former school board member Ann Maple passed away on April 28th. Ann served on the board from 2008 to 2016. I knew Ann well. And Ann was a former teacher and drama coach, and she worked on a number of school referenda projects even before she was on the board. She was just always a champion for students and for staff, and just a champion of the Northfield Public Schools. And so she made such a significant difference for this district and our community. And so I just hope people will remember that wonderful example of being a public servant that Ann Maple was for Northfield. And we mourn with her family. And I did have a chance to attend the memorial service on Saturday. It was well attended and clear that many people in our community appreciated Ann for what she did for the community. And many people spoke about the work that she did on the school board. And so we just take a few moments to remember Ann this evening. And those are the announcements that we have.
Thank you. Board members, do you have any announcements that you would like to make? Yes, Amy.
I just want to add one thing about Ann. She was one of the people who encouraged me to run for the board. And I think I'm part of her legacy on the board. And I hope that's all good with all of you.
Anyone else? All right, we will now move on to item 5, which is our items for discussion and reports. First up is the District Youth Council, and we'll have District Youth Council members Connor Percy and Grace Ryden to provide us an end of the year recap of the 23-24 school year. Welcome.
Okay, great. We've got a slideshow. Okay. All right. Is this microphone? Is it good?
It's good.
Okay, perfect. Hi, my name is Grace. This is Connor, and we're the DYC co-chairs for this year. This year has been great for DYC, and we're super excited to share with you what we've done, as well as what our plans are for the future.
So this is kind of like our mission statement for the DYC. In DYC, students grades 10 to 12 gather together for meetings every other week to talk about issues facing our school, updates from around the community, and projects that can be done for the benefit of the district. This group is student-led with the help of our amazing adult advisor, Melina, who's sitting right back there.
On DYC, we have 3 subcommittees, each with a student leader. Communications is for connecting with the student body. Connections is for connecting DYC with school administration. And equity, inclusion, and wellness is for projects revolving around including and welcoming all students of all socioeconomic and identity-based backgrounds at NHS.
Alongside school board meetings, DYC students also serve on a district board or committee as a student representative. For example, I attend Northfield Forward meetings, which I have for the past 2 years as a student representative, and others might attend policy, wellness, or facilities committees, among others. This type of involvement allows students to experience the inner workings of specific things in the district that really affect them, like policy, and it also allows for a student perspective in spaces where that might be not common or intuitively accessed. After DYC students attend a meeting on their committee, they report back to the big group on what was discussed, and we reflect on that and look for projects that can help us move problems forward.
All right, so we did quite a bit in 2022, 2023. I think Connor and I can both attest that this is one of our more productive years on DYC. So we're excited to share with you what we have done.
All right, so communications is our student body, again, student body to DYC group. A lot of the stuff they did might have been not as visible as the other groups, but it was still very important on like projecting our image and stuff like that. So they worked as a conduit to share information between the student body and the school board, which is a great thing for us. They made a poster, like put it up in our hallway, which is great for people to see. Honestly, I want to improve that even more next year, which is one of our goals that we have in the slideshow, which will come up later. But they also ran our social medias this year, and we're also working on an upcoming CCR tabling to get student feedback on CCR. So they've done definitely a lot with our students, and it's been great.
On to connections. Our connections community has done a lot of really huge things this year. 2 of those have been planning 2 different forums, which were the school board candidate forum and the recent budget forum just this March. And both of those were extremely successful. In particular, the budget forum, we had, I think, probably 400 students show up in the auditorium. It was very, very successful. These forums gave students the chance to ask questions about things that could affect them and then just get involved on a greater level in the district beyond what is usually accessible at just the high school level. The connections committee also ran and planned the brunch between us and the school board, which is always a super fun way to get to know all of you guys.
And thanks to all of you guys who came to both of those forums and the brunch. It was great as always. All right, and our equity and inclusion and wellness committee, they also had a great year. Maddie was a great leader in that committee. They continued and maintained the period products in our school bathrooms, which is what we started last year. We're hoping to look for other funding for that coming into the next year, so we don't have to keep getting youth bank grants. They met with both the BSU and Latinx Student Union recently to kind of get a sense of their groups and get some ideas on how we can improve equity in our schools. They also presented to them to get applications to our youth on boards so we can try to make our district youth council and other youth on boards more diverse. And also they tabled at the start of the year to let people know that they could change their name in the yearbook, which was a project that I started last year because it wasn't too well known that you could change your name to kind of like for gender affirming and gender queer students. So we do actually have these pamphlets, these name change guides. If any of you want one, I could definitely give you some. So
Yeah,
I'll
sure, just pass it around. Right?
pass it around right now.
Yeah.
So that was definitely a great thing that they did this year.
Looking forward, I'll be moving off to college, as we were just talking about, but Connor will be continuing as chair of the DYC next year, which I personally am very excited for.
Thank you, Grace. So some big things that we have planned for next year. We're getting a larger committee, which is great because we can just work on more projects and stuff, which is always awesome. As you can tell, like this was probably, well, I've only been up for 2 years. Grace has been up for 3, but this is definitely more productive than last year for me. And I feel like we've done a lot of stuff, so we can do even more next year, which is great. Just continuing to serve on the district committees, which is a big thing for us. And then just finding better and more consistent ways to connect with the student body, which, like I said earlier, I think that we could definitely kind of spread awareness about DYC, kind of make people more aware of it, because I don't know if a lot of people really know about it. So I think we can definitely improve that. And again, I'm looking forward to hopefully having a more diverse district youth council last year. I'm very excited about the applications that we've received for the youth on boards. So
Awesome. Thank you guys so much. Are there any questions that we can answer for you guys?
Thank you so much. That was great. All right, Ben.
Well, thanks, Grace and Connor. And I have the pleasure of being the board rep to the District Youth Council.
thank you so much for doing that. It's been great.
for having. Yeah, and thanks for organizing the budget forum. I think that was very helpful. It's good to get feedback from the students back in March. I appreciate that. Just curious, what was one thing that surprised both of you in joining or being on the District Youth Council in your tenure thus far?
That's a good question. For me personally, I think the scope of which we were able to do things in DYC actually did surprise me. For example, I mean, we keep on mentioning the period products in the bathroom. That's something that I have heard people talk about, not even knowing that I'm on the DYC, talk about how impactful that's been. So the ability to get funding and then also connect with administrators and actually get things done. Not in a pessimistic way, but it did kind of surprise me the scope to which we could do that. So that was definitely a pleasant surprise of mine. Yeah.
I definitely agree with Grace. It's great to see our ideas definitely come into action. I'd also say that it's just great to see all these different people. I think DYC is great at getting people from a lot of different backgrounds. Well, I do want to expand diversity that I think we do have a good start going, and I think it's nice to see all these different people from all these different backgrounds and social groups kind of coming together, and everyone really just working hard to try to improve our school. So yeah.
Fantastic. Anyone else? Question? Amy?
I just want to thank you both and your whole committee for everything that you've done for the district and for improving the experience that our students have as they go through the high school, and also just for connecting with the board, because it's really good for us to have some direct feedback from students as to what's working well and what isn't. And I really appreciate that you've been that conduit for us. And thank you for all the work you've done both this year and in previous years.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Anyone else? Jenny?
Okay, first, I just wanted to thank you for your hard work that you've put in, especially making sure that all of the students, their voices are heard. I think that's a really important part that you guys are doing, and you might not even know that you're doing it. So thank you. And I also really appreciated the school board brunch. I think that's something we could do more often.
Totally.
I have one question though. So it's grades 10 through 12. Okay. And then and then you have applications that the students just fill out if they're interested. How do you go about kind of getting the students interested to fill out those applications? And is that something you're working on now to improve, or is it working really well?
Yeah, so that's definitely something I also want to improve for next year, because I definitely think that we didn't have initially so much excitement for youth on boards, and I'd really like, I mean, because it's a great program, all of the boards, and I definitely like to get people excited for that. I'd say something that we did really well this year is, again, the equity and inclusion committee went to both BSU meeting and a Latinx student union meeting to present to them about youth on boards and try to get applications from them so we could have more diverse kind of things. So maybe even expanding that to more inclusive groups and stuff like that. And just kind of, I mean, we have like posters around the school, stuff like that to kind of promote that, and like school updates and stuff, but maybe, I don't know, going on the announcements or just expanding things into stuff like that. Cause it is really just like a very unique and great program that Northfield has.
We do also get recommendations from students who are currently on youth on boards of students they think would be good additions to the program. And they get personalized letters from the youth on boards program from me. So.
Oh, wow. Wow. That's a lot. That's awesome.
Okay, Corey.
Thanks for being here, Grace and Connor, and thanks for the presentation. Connor, you mentioned finding sustained financing for the period project. What's a way that the greater community can support DYC, particularly when it comes to funding some of your programs?
Well, I mean, we do need funding every once in a while for stuff like that. A lot of the stuff we do doesn't need funding. It's more just like action steps and stuff like that. But I don't know if there's like specifically a way that the community could help, but I mean, we definitely are considering maybe doing like a fundraiser or something that we can maybe help both bring awareness to the district youth council, as well as raise some money for those period products and stuff like that. So kind of like a combined effort there. I can't think of anything specific right now, but definitely.
Can the community send checks to Malia on behalf of the DYC?
Yeah, well, yeah,
Of course, totally.
Care of DYC.
we'd love that. Yeah.
We would always accept that, of course.
I wouldn't say no.
Yeah.
Very good. Thank you. Anyone else? Question, comment? Well, thank you so much. We appreciate you and success in this next year.
Thank you guys so
Thanks
much.
so much.
Okay, next up is the iPad lease presentation by Director of Technology Nate Knudsen and Director of Finance Val Murdestor. This will be an item for individual action at the May 22nd board meeting. Welcome, Nate.
All right. I'm setting this here on the floor. All right. All right, good. So I'm here to speak to you today about the 2023 iPad lease refresh. I'm Nate Knudsen, Director of Technology Services. This is the first opportunity I've had all these years to present to the board, so I'm really looking forward to it. Just to give you some background information, I was originally hired in July of 2004 as a workstation specialist at the new middle school at the time. I've worked in roles, like I said, in the workstation specialist. I've worked as a technology support specialist, as an assistant network manager, and now a year for technology, director of technology services. Just kind of looking back and reflecting at my time, just an interesting fact, when I was hired here at Northfield, we didn't even have a wireless network. And now wireless is everywhere here in every nook and cranny. Also looking back, kind of an interesting thing that kind of hit me back then was just the fact that basically computer labs and just how much it was a big deal for classroom teachers in order to get computer lab time. It was almost a competition because at the elementary level, we had maybe one computer lab at each of the buildings. Middle school, we had 2 computer labs, and I think high school had kind of 2 computer labs in the media center. So it was always a battle. And at the time, they wrote it in a book, paper, pencil, to check out the computers. And then fast forward a few years that the state mandated online testing. They used to do paper, pencil, and those same computer labs were offline for over a month that could not be used for any type of instructional purpose other than online testing. And I just remember that fact, and now kind of fast forward to today, we had our MCA testing. I'd like to report it went very successful. And if you think about it, back then we had maybe 30 kids in an elementary building able to test at one time. Now we have entire grade levels, actually multiple grade levels in multiple buildings being able to test at the same time. And not only that, on a device that they're already used to and comfortable with. And I think that's just great for, the students feeling comfortable with their device when they're taking an assessment, and just the efficiency of basically getting the students back into instruction instead of having to wait for all the testing. So just a couple of reflections there. And also looking back from when I was first hired to now, I really think the main reason that we got to where we are today is really the financial support of the Northfield community. Without that support over the years, this network technology would not be the same. So I just want to basically say thank you to the Northfield community for that. And then the next slide here, and I promise I will eventually talk about iPads, is basically our strategic plan. For me as a educator, it's very good to have a common vision. And our vision is to prepare every student for lifelong success by developing critical thinkers who are curious and ready to engage in our society. And if you notice on the right hand there, we have our strategic commitments. And those are very important to me throughout my time here in Northfield, basically to always kind of go back to my decision process. Am I reaching those strategic commitments? So I really hope in my presentation that some of those will shine through, like stewardship, equity, and just really learner outcomes. So for me, it's more just a grounding piece for me, and it's just a really important part. Now I'm getting to the actual subject of the day is their current iPads. I kind of want to give you kind of a top-down look, kind of a 40,000 foot view of our current fleet that we have out there. We primarily have 2 big generations or 2 big iPad groups that are within the district. They're the iPad 6 generation. I sometimes might refer to those as an iPad 6. And we have the 7th generation iPads. Again, I might have referred to that to the iPad 7. For the 6th generation iPad fleet, they were originally leased in 2019, and those actually replaced a previous lease before that. And there was 4,200 devices that were leased, and that included cases and the Logitech Crayon. These devices were deployed both to staff and students. And an interesting thing, right before the pandemic, when the storm clouds were rolling in, was basically we ended up taking and repurposing the staff iPads and moving them down to grade levels 1 through 3 to support 1-to-1 student device ratio. Excuse me. And this was very important when it came to distant learning was extremely critical. One thing with these devices, we plan on, once we collect them in the fall of 2023, is to basically sell them in the open market. I don't know what the value is. It all kind of depends then. And basically that helps offset the lease of the first year of the new lease. I will be coming back to the board in the fall of 2023 with more of those details and more of the numbers. The other big thing of iPads that we have is the 7th generation iPads. The current fleet of those were 450 devices. They were actually purchased using COVID-19 relief funds. These devices replace the teachers who got their devices deployed to students in 1st through 3rd grade. And these devices will be continued to be used by staff and is not part of this new lease that we're proposing. Main reason there, the 7th generation for the staff. When I asked my team, how many issues we're having with them with staff, very few, and they're working very well. One note on 7th generation iPad is that because they were purchased with federal funds, they cannot be sold in the same manner of the 6th generation iPad. So something kind of keep in mind kind of long-term because they were purchased with federal funds. All right, so the next slide is really kind of what device I am recommending. I am recommending that we lease the 9th generation iPads for the following reasons. First is cost. The 9th generation iPad costs $120 less per device than the 10th generation iPad. And if you think of it, going from a 6th generation to a 9th and 10th generation, there's a huge leap in technology, huge leap. But going from a 9th generation to 10th generation, I cannot justify the cost of paying another $120. There isn't that much of a difference. And in fact, in some of the meetings that Val and Matt were in with our Apple refs, they actually admitted that, yeah, the 9th generation will meet our needs. And we are finding that most school districts, because of that cost, is going with the 9th generation iPad. The next one is kind of an interesting one. You might be asking yourself is, why does Nate have the headphone jack listed on the slide? Well, the reason that is important is that because we have students who, Northfield students who happen to receive special education services, they use for a lot of their apps, headsets and headphones. If we didn't have that headphone jack, we would end up having to replace those. So it'd be an additional cost. Additionally, for online testing, some of the assessment tests do require headphones. And again, if the 9th generation still has the traditional headphone jack, that means we wouldn't have to have the cost of replacing headsets. With the 10th generation, you're looking at Bluetooth. Unfortunately, according to my colleague Hope, the online testing doesn't allow Bluetooth yet headphones. So that is a little bit of an issue. The other one is the Lightning port. Now this port is what plugs into the iPad to charge the iPad. The 9th generation uses the same plug-in as the 6th and 7th generation. And why that is important for us is that over the last few years, we invested a lot of resources into elementary classrooms providing iPad charging stations. All those stations uses the Lightning type of cable. The iPad 10 has moved to more the district, or not the district, but moved to the industry standard of a USB-C. But if we were to move to the iPad 10, we'd have to circle back and replace all that cabling for, again, an additional cost. And that, again, it just comes down to stewardship. The other one, a little bit less of a factor, but it is a factor, is that the 9th generation iPad is essentially the same size as our previous generation iPads. What that means is come fall, when students turn in their device to swap it out, if their case happens to be in excellent condition, I honestly don't know after 4 years what kind of condition, how many excellent condition cases we're going to get. But if we do, we could use those as having some spares on hand and be able to get stewardship to be reused some of those. Again, the iPad 10 is just ever so slightly bigger that our existing cases would not work. The next one on there is Logitech crayons. The Logitech crayons were part of the previous lease. It's a stylus that is very comparable to the Apple Pencil, but with a lot less cost. And with that, I recommend that we go with the Logitech crayon. And this lease will update the Logitech crayons for middle school and high school students. And the reason I am looking at just middle school and high school students is we found over the previous lease that was where we found the Logitech crayons used the absolute most. Think of kids in the classroom writing notes on their iPads and Notability. I asked my tech team on it, and they affirmed with me that yes, we see it all the time that kids have notes, handwritten notes, which I think is absolutely great. At the elementary level, they haven't been used as much. However, elementary classroom teachers can go to the media center and check out classroom sets if needed. So that's why I recommend the Logitech crayon. So I want to go in a little bit more of the least detail, but first, how many devices are needed? That was a very tough one for me to kind of figure out, because you have to think 3 or 4 years down the road. Because you don't want to have too many devices just sitting on the shelf, not being used. Again, not good stewardship. But you also don't want to get in a situation where we don't have enough devices for the students that we're projecting in year 3 and 4. So what I use there is Val's enrollment projections that she uses for finance. I think you're very familiar with it. And then as we all know, we're in declining enrollment. So what means this for us in the 3rd and 4th year, we're going to have less students, then the number of devices available will increase. So it's kind of balancing that out. If in year 3 or 4, we somehow end up having more students increase enrollment, I think that's a problem that we would all really enjoy, and we'll work through it when that time comes. But right now, the hard facts is we'll have less students in the 4th year of lease. The other one is an interesting one is breakage. Now the breakage is not necessarily the screen is cracked. We can repair something like that. Or a headphone is, the jack is broken in there. Again, we can send it out for repair. 2 weeks later, we get it back. The breakage that I'm talking about is an iPad that is damaged beyond repair. It's no longer functional whatsoever. So what I looked at there was essentially on our previous lease of 2019, I looked at what was our breakage over those 4 years. And when I looked at that and grabbed that data, so over a 4-year period, we had a breakage of about 4.8%. Now, again, over a 4-year period. I expect that breakage will actually go down with this new lease, just the fact that right now the elementary students are keeping their devices at school. So it's just less wear and tear and chances of having that type of breakage. So that's another factor that, I have to consider. Again, I put Logitech crayons up there. I already kind of alluded it to a previous slide that we're only looking at replacing the high school and middle school student crayons. Those are used the most. Those are probably the ones that need to be replaced, less battery life and such. If again, some of those are in good shape, we will take some of the existing ones and use them for classroom sets at the elementary buildings. So now we're talking about how many units we buy. So what I'm recommending is 4,000 ninth generation iPad. That is 200 iPads less than our previous lease. Again, reason for that, declining enrollment. Then I'm also recommending is 4,000 iPad cases. Again, only makes sense. You have 4,000 brand new devices. We want to make sure we have the cases to protect them. And then for the Logitech crayons, looking at again, middle school and high school, 2,690 of them is what I'm currently looking at. The next thing there is just kind of how this lease is funded, or even the previous leases were funded. The leases are funded through the operating capital budget. For the fiscal year 23-24, the operating capital budget was approved by you on the February 27th, 2023 board meeting. And that included our annual iPad lease costs. This is very similar over the many generations of the iPad leases we have. I do think it's worthwhile because I know school finances can be complicated for the folks who are watching. And just to point out, with the capital operating budget, we really are limited on what we can actually fund through our capital operating. So switches, computers, the iPad lease, textbooks can be funded out of there. Maintenance type of items, building type of items can be funded out of that lease. And I know we've had a lot of previous conversations over the month, very tough conversations and choices that we had to make. And it's just very good just to kind of separate those two type of budgets. that we're very limited on what we can actually use for the capital operating budget. Now I just kind of move into the lease detail. The annual yearly cost of the lease is for approximately $413,000. This is a slight increase over our previous lease. I think our previous lease was $406,000. And part of that is due to the just slightly higher interest rate and just basically the cost of inflation with everything going up. So we're looking at the yearly cost of $413,000 over 4 years. And the total cost of the lease will be roughly $1.65 million. That's after the 4 years. And just as the previous leases, after those 4 years, we will own the devices. So now I'd like to open up to any questions.
Thank you so much, Nate. Hey, board members, do you have any questions? All right, Ben?
Nate, thanks. Great job. Just a quick question on security. I know that's been kind of top of
Mhm.
mind, obviously, in districts, not just in Minnesota, but kind of around the country.
Yep.
What's Apple's pretty good at maintaining kind of security and updating their older devices to the newest iOS system. What's the life cycle of that? Would you anticipate that the 9s would be still supported at the end of a 4-year lease?
Yes, I do anticipate, and with talking with the reps, they do suspect that it will be supported. To kind of give you an idea, the 5th generation iPad is still supported and you can get software updates. So you look back how many generations, I think now they're at 10. So we should be safe in those 4 years. Yep.
Good question. Amy?
Nice presentation. Thank
Thank
you.
you.
I am curious about a couple of things. First, are they still manufacturing the 9th generation iPads, or are they just selling old stuff?
Currently, they still are manufacturing the 9th gen iPad. Any person can go retail, buy the 9th generation. The really thing that's changed is when the 10th generation came out, they're charging $120 more for that 10th generation. But yes, you could still go to an Apple store and buy it.
Okay. And then are we still charging the students insurance on their iPads, and how does that fit into this equation, if at all?
Yes, it fits in. Yes, we still are charging students insurance. I believe it's $50, $20, and then $15, and it kind of staggers down depending on their financial means. I'm expecting that to remain the same. One possible change that I am kind of looking at is, I don't want to say this too loud, but a little bit of a loophole that we've had sometimes where a student mid-year would come in and all of a sudden decide they want to purchase insurance. And then a day later, they come in with a totally broken iPad. So we are looking at little deals there where maybe we will tweak it, where at the beginning of the school year, there's a kind of a period where it's I envision like no questions type of ask, sign up for insurance. But then like during the school year, I think we're looking at it more, so we're fair across the board, looking at it more that the student has to show us their device, that it's in fact not broken if they do decide to purchase insurance a little bit later on in that year, because it's only fair for everybody.
So right now, if their device breaks, and they don't have insurance, they're responsible
For the full cost of the iPad.
And then my last question is about the iPad 7s that we're holding on to.
Mhm.
How are we going to continue using those?
Well, the iPad 7s are mainly used for staff right now. They are a little bit faster than the previous 6th gen version. And what we really have noticed is because the staff usage is so much different and probably not as much as say as a student taking notes and all the assessment type of apps, all that stuff in there, is that they don't really necessarily need all the power. And for the most part, when I ask my tech staff, I'm like, have we had any issues with the iPad 7? And the answer is no. With the iPad 6s, we have memory issues, storage issues, apps freezing. We're just not seeing that for staff. I mean, staff are using it, some of them as a replacement for their smart boards, is they're actually using their tablet as the smart board. Now, that doesn't necessarily mean you need a lot of power in order to do that. So for the most part, the iPad 7 is working great. And if it does get into the situation, maybe we can revisit that when the MacBook lease is up in 2 years.
Thank you.
Anyone else? Robert?
Thanks for your presentation.
Mhm.
My question relates to what will it mean for you and your staff when if we get 4,000 new iPads, what does that look like in the fall? Do you have to get everything set up by beginning of September? Is it?
That is a great question. Luckily, we have lots of experience with it. The one thing I could say right now is we want to avoid lines, because the first year I remember doing it, we had lines at the high school going around corners. Luckily, we've got good systems in place that it's now when you set up an iPad, literally you log in and it auto sets itself up. What I'm kind of looking at is if the lease gets here, the equipment gets here during the summer, because elementary students don't take their iPads home, so they'll be here during the summer, is having my team start the process of swapping out the elementary. So that's a big chunk right there. And then we're looking at rolling them out in the fall when students return, and it would be just kind of a staggered type of a rollout, where maybe I'll work with the building principals. There's, whatever times with their schedules that they can come down and just literally swap out the iPad, they log in and they get all their type of stuff. Main goal is to just make it as easy as we can on the students and really on the families. We have had in the past where we've done like a large switch out. Well, I guess one example would be the iPad 7s. When we got the iPad 7s in order to get the 6s to the students before the pandemic, we have done those type of switches during the school year. And it actually goes quite well. And a lot of it is really to thank to our Jamf management system. This is kind of what manages the whole iPad, gets it all ready.
Good. Anyone else? Question or comment? Okay, thank you very much. Very informative.
All right, thank you.
Okay, we now have item C, cooperative sponsorship actions. Director Bubba Sullivan will come before us. Is that right?
Yeah, I'm going to frame it and Bubba's going to be here to help me with questions.
Okay, if Bubba will come up, we have a non-exclusive cooperative sponsorship and also a recommendation for a dissolution. There's no action at this meeting.
So Bubba and I are going to tag team this. I'm going to give the frame for the board perspective, and then Bubba's going to be able to engage in the conversation as board members have questions. So we've got two different pieces. The first of which is, as you know, we are an authorizer of charter schools, and Arcadia Charter School being one of the two. We have a long history of encouraging Arcadia students to participate in Northfield High School activities. And we typically will create a non-exclusive partnership or non-exclusive cooperative sponsorship with Arcadia on an as-needed basis. And so something that's different about the Arcadia cooperative sponsorship versus the Randolph one that I'm going to mention in a moment is the State High School League rules only require us to count the individual charter school students who participate on our athletic teams as part of the count toward our competitive section placement. It's just the way that the non-exclusive cooperative sponsorship rule is written. And so therefore, when we have a non-cooperative or a non-exclusive partnership sponsorship, we only count, if it's one student on football, we count one student. If it's 3 students on swimming, we count 3 students on swimming. And that very rarely, I can't ever remember it ever, prompts us to move up a class or affects our enrollment in that way. So we do have some interest, is our understanding from Arcadia, for girls swim and dive for next fall. So we are asking you to approve that cooperative sponsorship at the next meeting. The second one is something that we've been talking to you about for a while. We first prompted you about this in January when we talked about dissolving the girls' hockey cooperative sponsorship with Randolph, where we had no student athletes participating from Randolph for some time. And we told you at that time, we had some concerns about the long-term viability of our boys cooperative sponsorship and with Randolph for boys hockey. And we had intentionally said we were going to wait every 2 years. The high school league resorts schools in all of the different sports and all of the different sections. And it's not just about your enrollment, it's about the enrollment of other school districts as well, other high schools as well. And we learned that we were going to be placed in AA. We've been in single A hockey for some time. There is an appeal process because we were just above the cutoff. Bubba and the activities department filed the appeal. We had actually expected that that appeal might be honored. It turned out that it was not. And I have had a chance to see a little bit of the inner workings of the State High School League and really respect the work that they have to do. If you think about all the schools through all the state and all of the different activities, they do have to have a cutoff. They have to have a set of criteria. We just happen to be across that line just a little bit when we count the Randolph enrollment, and we're required to count quite a bit, about half of the Randolph enrollment in our competitive section placement when we do this kind of cooperative sponsorship. It's different from the charter school cooperative sponsorship in that way. So after reviewing with Bubba, with our hockey coaches and with some other folks, we've determined that we do want to dissolve the cooperative sponsorship with Randolph so that we can remain in AA. We have 2 student athletes from Randolph who have participated on the team, who are on the varsity roster last year, or in the program last year. And, we take that we want to do good things for kids, right? That's one of our focuses. In fact, when I talked with some of the representatives from Randolph, there was a little bit of surprise expressed that probably thought you would have done this a few years ago. And we want to do good things for kids. But when it does have this adverse impact on our resident student athletes, that's where we think that the right way to go is to recommend the dissolution. Now, because we have already gotten past the competitive section placement, if both boards have to agree to dissolve the cooperative sponsorship. So if you approve this at the next meeting and the Randolph board does not, then we will continue with the cooperative sponsorship for next year only. We would be playing in AA. And then at the end of next year, we would then dissolve the cooperative sponsorship. So we've reached out to Randolph. We've talked with them. They understand that this is where we're going. We do not know what their board will decide. We do feel badly that these 2 Randolph student athletes are affected. We've looked at a couple of different ways that we could potentially mitigate that. We are having a hard time finding a way of doing that and maintaining their eligibility. The transfer rules for the high school league are fairly complicated, and we just don't have a ton of experience with that, though we're trying to find ways where that would still work. But frankly, we would just want to be straightforward that it may not work. But we are making this recommendation for what we think is the best interests of our resident or enrolled student athletes, is what I should say, because we do have some open enrolled students who are eligible to play as well. So we just wanted to share these 2 cooperative sponsorships with you. We are working through as our enrollment has declined and changed. For a long time, it didn't matter, right? We were going to be in the class that we were going to be placed in because we were in that kind of sweet spot in the middle of those enrollment classes. That is changing. And so as we look at what are the conditions in which we would go for a cooperative sponsorship, obviously anything with Arcadia. Then in addition, when we aren't able to field enough of our own student athletes to be able to have a team, for example, gymnastics and alpine ski, we have multiple partners with that. Without those partnerships, we would not be able to field those teams. And so we're looking at those kinds of criteria. In this case, for boys hockey, we have no problem fielding a team with plenty of substitutes. We have no problem being competitive in nature. And so those are also some of the reasons that we feel comfortable recommending the dissolution of this cooperative sponsorship. So Bubba and I are here to answer any questions that you have about these 2 recommendations.
Okay, thank you, Matt. Board members, do you have any questions or comments? Jeff, did you have a comment?
Yeah, I was thinking of just kind of more of an explanation to people of, I don't think a lot of people understand that, we actually have to comply with the league. So you're a school, you comply with the league. So you can maybe talk a little bit about how that works. And then if a parent or whatever else wanted to bring something up, how would, that process goes if they want to dispute something? Because I've had people over the years saying, well, I don't agree with that or whatever else. It's like, well, no, we have to join the league, but if you want to do something separately as the district, so that kind of, it ties in. I understand the Randolph situation, and by counting a couple more students, we have to take half their population into account. So, those are kind of my couple of questions.
Yeah, so the league has, their bylaws, and all member schools need to follow those bylaws, and those bylaws are on eligibility and co-ops and how you run events and many, many things. And in this case, with cooperatives, there's some rules. And as Matt said, if we have a traditional co-op with the school, we end up taking 50% of their enrollment. And in this case, the hockey one, taking 50% of Randolph's enrollment only put us 16 students over the edge, which was really too bad. We would have loved to have, been able to, as Matt said, do great things for their kids as well as ours. But just sometimes where that line is drawn is where that line is drawn.
So is that on sport by sport or is that all sports? Would it be?
It is. So each sport has their, depending on number of classes, and number of teams that participate in that sport, have a different line of where you would be double A or single A, or for example, in boys and girls hockey, that line is different. There's fewer schools that play girls hockey than boys. And so that population line is slightly different.
And then the protocol on a parent, just so if they talk to, do they talk to you directly if they wanted to see what we're doing as a school? I mean, obviously there's a process with that. And what would you suggest if a parent had a question?
Yeah, it depends, sure, the policy on there would be definitely call me directly, or email me, and we would certainly navigate through that. And I've had to make many calls to the high school league this year to get guidance. But yeah, that's the best way to navigate, whether it be transfer rules or eligibility rules, those kinds of things.
Thank you.
Thank you. Great questions. Anyone else comments or question? Thank you so much.
All right, thank you.
Right, we have item D, our policy committee recommendations, and Dr. Hellman will offer up any comments on policies 206, 211, 212, and 214.
Just going to give a brief high-level overview of each policy and the modest changes that are in each policy. The first one is, first of all, I just want to point out, this is the regular review of these policies. So as you know, we have each policy on a 5-year cycle, and we are trying to make sure that we take a look at every policy every 5 years. Some policies are required to be looked at every year. Some policies jump the line because the legislature has made changes that require us to take a look at them sooner. But these 200 series, this is where we're back to. We're actually back to looking at it again after we restarted the policy committee 6 years ago. And so we're back to the 200s. So policy 206 is around public participation in school board meetings. A few modest changes, really just changing some of the narrative to focus on the public comment portion. It's not public comment is not intended to be a discussion. So it's just focusing on that we encourage public comments. Also talking about just what the defining and really more closely aligning in the policy, what Claudia reads at the beginning of the meeting, who are the people that are eligible to make public comment. So we're talking about stakeholders who are residents, business and property owners, parents and guardians, students and employees of the district. So we utilize that language. In addition, we have been very fortunate that we have had great participation and people have followed our rules, but we did want to make it explicit because we do pay attention to the things that happen across the country, that sometimes we've seen circumstances, not here, but elsewhere, where people have not followed the public comment rules, and even after reasonable intervention by the board chair, continue not to follow those rules. And so just explain that the board does reserve the right to suspend someone's ability to comment publicly for up to 1 year. We just want people to be clear that if you don't follow the rules, and the worst case scenario, there could be a consequence. We're not required to have public comment by law. I don't anticipate this happening, but if we don't talk about it, we don't put it in the policy, we wouldn't have the ability to reference it. And then there was also a section in procedures on the complaints, and this board has adopted a complaint process. And so we just point to that complaint process rather than outlining it a second time in the policy. So those are really the major changes in policy 206. Again, I think they're fairly modest updates to the policy. The next item 211 is around the criminal or civil action against the school district, school board member, employee, or student. Again, modest changes to this one as well. If we really take a look at it, we are aligning a section of this around criminal investigations with language that we updated several years ago in the high school handbook, just to be very clear about what kinds of interviews could take place at school and what are the conditions that would prompt that. So we just updated that. That's the only change that of substance in policy 211. When we take a look at policy 212, school board member development, we are adding some pieces just around encouraging board members to continue their professional growth as board members through the MSBA training process. Something that we are just making more clear is that statute does require that board members take the some MSBA training, required MSBA training, within 180 days after taking their oath of office. And remember, the oath of office is when you sign the oath of office after you're elected, not the ceremonial oath that you take when you are at the first meeting in January. So it really is. So some people actually might take the training before they are officially seated, because once you've signed that oath of office, you've completed that. So it's just aligning with statute. And then again, some just encouragement around board members to continue their professional growth through the MSBA phase training. Those are the main changes with that. And then in policy 214, again, I want to point out that we're not planning any out-of-state travel for any board members anytime soon, but we have the policy, and so we should make sure that we update it. And again, we are just making some modest changes in terms of where does the reimbursement, who is the reimbursement submitted to? We're just, again, condensing a bunch of different kinds of expenses to all expenses must be itemized and submitted. Again, this is not something in the 14 years that I've been here, I don't ever recall a board member doing out-of-state travel. But should that become necessary in the future, we need to have a policy to govern it. Those are the four main policies. We have one more, but Val is going to talk about that when she starts the general fund presentation. So those are the four policies that came out of the regular review from the policy committee. I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Okay, thank you. Any questions or comments? Corey?
Just a question pertaining to policy 206 as well as 211, just terminology. So for 206, under definitions, G, district stakeholders, we have parents and guardians. I think we're using parents and stakeholder, or parents and caretakers, excuse me.
We are, and
Legal thing.
it is, yep.
Okay.
So the policy committee, the style guide, we are trying to be more inclusive by using the term caretaker, but we are finding certain circumstances where there's a legal piece around the term guardian. And so in each one of these cases, we're trying to discern which is the right term for that particular item. And we feel that item, now a caretaker might also would most likely be a resident, right? But let's say it's someone who's open enrolled. That's where that legal piece of who has the responsibility for the student comes into that term of parent or guardian.
So 211, policy 211 with criminal investigations also
Same thing.
reference.
Yep.
It references statute. So I assume. Okay, thank you.
Anyone else? Comment, question? Amy?
So just looking at 212, this is just a small suggestion for a change of wording. Under 2A, where it lists, this is have to attend the orientation and training session sponsored by the Minnesota School Boards Association 100 days after taking their oath of office. I think we need an extra word, like within 180 days.
Yep, we will make that
Sounds like
change.
6 months exactly afterwards, you have to take that. So
Hopefully you plan well then to be there on 180th. We'll fix it. Thank you for catching that.
Good.
and then I do have a comment on the energy management, but are we waiting?
We're going to
for that?
present that next.
Okay.
Yep.
Any other comments? Very good. Okay, thank you. All right, next is the policy 810 energy and building management, and the guideline presented by Director Murdestorp, and Dr. Hellman will also be.
I'll be helping out with, but Val is going to be sharing the perspective. She helped with the policy development along with former Director of Buildings and Grounds, Cole Nelson. So Val is going to share some of the big picture history of this, how we got here, and what the research went into developing this new policy for the district.
Okay, and then the board will be asked to take action on this policy at the next board meeting.
Thank you. Good evening. So I'm going to talk a little bit about policy 810, which governs the energy guidelines that we're recommending. So just to bring you back, part of the budget reduction process, I believe it was last year's process, so fiscal 22, was a commitment on behalf of the district services package to reduce utility costs by at least $50,000. So as part of that, we've taken the year to do some research. We've looked at some policies from other districts and gotten kind of a flavor of what other districts are doing in this arena. I will say we've also really highlighted stewardship as one of our core commitments, and making sure that we are not only being good financial stewards, but we're conserving energy and natural resources, and we want to maintain a safe and healthy environment for our staff. So those are the lenses that we chose to move forward with. So in summary, what the policy is recommending and the associated procedure document, just to be clear, there's two different documents, is really a document that's going to govern anything that directly impacts utility cost and usage. So that can include room temperature ranges. And so there's a guideline about what the range is, knowing that it's not going to be a perfect science and that we'll do the best we can. Different facilities have different capabilities of doing that depending on how old or new they are, but certainly striving to make sure everyone's in that range and controlling that. Lighting controls, making sure that we're reminding people to shut off lights when they aren't needed and those sorts of things, putting a bigger emphasis on that. A lot of this is really driven at all of the system controls for the building. So ensuring that our buildings and grounds department has a guideline across the district to make sure that we are using our systems as effectively and efficiently as we can. It talks about technology, so ensuring that we're shutting things off at the end of the day rather than just leaving them on. All of those things generate some utility costs. And then personal appliances. We looked at a range of policies that went from not touching appliances at all to absolutely nothing is allowed that you brought into the classroom or to the building. So we took sort of the middle road as a hopeful compromise, understanding that this is obviously not an ideal situation and wanting to acknowledge that there are some convenience things for staff. And we understand that and respect that. But at the same time, we're reducing the budget. And so there's a tier of appliances, some of which are no cost. You can have, one lamp in your classroom or in your office. But then there's tiers, I think it's 100 and 250, depending on the type of appliance. So if you want to bring in one of the tiered appliances into your classroom or office, you can do that. There's just going to be a fee associated with that to help offset the district's utility cost. I think those are the highlights.
Yeah, just to clarify, the tiers are 100 and 200.
200. Okay. Sorry. We had a couple different numbers floating, so I locked in the wrong one. That is the kind of the summary of the policy. It's really just to provide some consistency across the district with all of our systems, to provide a resource for our buildings and grounds team, and to help generate either a reduced expenditure cost for utilities or some additional revenue to help offset that. So I will take any questions that you might have on that.
Thank you so much. Okay, questions, comments? Amy?
Thank you, Val, for going through this. And I know it was a lot of hard work to figure out how to compromise. And I just feel for you having to go through this because there's a tension between our strategic commitment to stewardship and our strategic commitment to the people, specifically the staff. And I know a lot of the staff like to make their classrooms welcoming to students and interesting and a little different. And I worry that we might be putting too much regimentation into what we're asking of our teachers. So I just want to say that I'm curious if the fees involved in the various electrical appliances, whatever they are, if they have any relationship to the actual cost, if you figured out the cost and it would cover the electrical costs. And just, if there's anything we can do to still encourage our teachers to be able to express themselves and with their classroom, and also be good stewards of our finances.
Yep. So I have a couple thoughts in terms of the cost. I will say there's a wide range of what things actually cost. Do you use it every day? Do you unplug it during the summer or not? There's a really wide range depending on the device that they bring in, how it's rated, how old it is, there's just a lot of factors. And we were not interested in implementing a procedure that resulted in a checklist of 18 different fee structures based on the item, and that didn't make sense. We wanted it to be simple. So 2 tiers, and understanding that some of those items might be more or less in actual cost to what was generated. I did do a calculation earlier today, actually, just to see. I took our actual utility per kilowatt hour rate for the middle school. I had a question specifically from the middle school, and went on Keurig's website to see how much energy it typically uses and that sort of thing. And based on Keurig's recommendation of it just being plugged in, not actually using it every day, it came to like $61 a year with our rate. Now, assuming they're going to use it because they brought it in for that reason, I'm going to assume that that's going to bump up closer to that $100. So I feel pretty good about that range. It wasn't something where we were looking for an exact science. And I honestly will say part of the goal is to conserve energy. And so part of it is we're discouraging the use of personal appliances. We offer them in a break room, both the centralized break room, and if they have multiple floors or wings where they have kind of a workroom, we're offering opportunities there as well. So it's not that they don't have access to it, it's just a convenience for them to have some of those things right in their classroom, or their office for that matter. So we just want to be transparent about that is part of the conversation as well. You had another part of your question, and now I talked myself in a tangent, can't remember what it was.
It was basically, how can we encourage our teachers to express themselves and provide welcoming classrooms in a way that allows us to be good stewards of our energy.
Yep. So I think there's enough leeway, and they're allowed a lamp for ambiance and whatever they determine is necessary. They're allowed holiday lights and things during the specific window. That's actually a fire marshal specification that we're just kind of putting in print for people to understand. And the other things, or the ways I guess I've experienced teachers kind of warming up their classroom, is I would say it's not always something that you're plugging in. They do so many creative things with their classrooms, with just design things and layout things, furniture things. And so we're certainly going to take feedback on the policy as it's implemented, and we can change it in the future if it's really limiting. We are going to recommend adding a specific section in the personal appliance prior to approving it that talks specifically about if there's something needed for curriculum. So a science class needs a specific fridge and microwave for their equipment. We want to make sure that that's obviously included at no charge. That was not the intent of the policy. And so there might be some things that are curriculum related that make sense to include in that as well. But the personal appliance section is really more targeted at all of the kind of extra amenities that are convenient, not really, not intended to disrupt what they're trying to get across in the feel of the classroom.
And then my last question about this is, knowing how inconsistent our heating and cooling is in the high school, seeing that they can't have fans or they can't have space heaters. I just feel for them if they have a really cold room or a really hot room. What are we doing for those teachers?
Yep. So the space heaters, just for the record, are strictly prohibited from the fire marshal. And so that has never been an option. We're again just putting it in print for staff to have. The fans, I think if if we can come to a place where we can't regulate the temperature in a room consistent to the policy, then I think we would certainly step in and make sure that that room is supported in a way that makes sense. We just want to avoid extra fans that aren't really serving a purpose if the room is in the appropriate range and that sort of thing. We do have a procedure in there about how we're going to measure the temperature to make sure that we're consistent. We're not going to aim it at the window in the high school and then say it's super cold in there. So we have processes in place to make sure that it's as close to possible, but I don't see us not working with people. If we can't get it in to be compliant with the policy, we will make sure that people feel comfortable. Does that help?
Yes, thank you.
And I just want to make a comment on too, that we know implementing a policy like this does remove convenience and some autonomy for staff. And we don't take that lightly. We applaud, we go with all of our strategic commitments, right? Both people and stewardship. And Amy is right. There's a conflict sometimes between some of our strategic commitments. So we don't propose this lightly, but we have all heard over a couple of years of budget reductions, pleas from people, staff, students, and families to do whatever we could to make budget reductions away from people, right? Asking us to find as many non-personnel costs as we can so that we can really maintain programming and maintaining as many staff as possible. And when to get at non-personnel costs, this is the kind of thing that we have to look at. So I certainly want to recognize that this is not going to be the most popular policy that has been proposed. I understand it's going to not only even inconvenience, but it's going to frustrate and it will anger some people, understandably so. And I don't blame them for that at all. I think we also have to come back to remind ourselves, first of all, stewardship's about more than just financial piece. It's also about making sure we're managing our environmental impact. Some of the places that Val mentioned, some common spaces may not yet have a group refrigerator, and those are things that we will be implementing here, between now and the beginning of next school year, so that people have a fairly reasonably convenient place to put their lunch or to get some of those kinds of creature comforts that people need. So then we are able to make sure we're getting an energy efficient device and that we are combining those things in that way. So we know that any kind of change is difficult. We don't take this lightly, but I do want to come back to why we have to do this. Number one, it's a strategic commitment. And environmental impact is as important as financial impact. But we also were asked to try to find as many non-personnel related reductions as we could. And this is exactly one of them. And in a few minutes, I'll talk about the legislature, and we have to make these kinds of decisions because we have been chronically underfunded for 20 years. We have a very large special education cross subsidy that needs to be addressed. And so our declining enrollment plus this chronic underfunding are part of the reasons that we're looking into it. We would have looked into this anyway because of that commitment to environmental stewardship. But I think we just need to go back to remembering why are we proposing this? And it was really to reduce as many non-personnel costs as possible.
Thank you. Ben.
Thanks, Val. And Matt, just a question to pick up kind of the stewardship thread. What's the time frame in terms of, and maybe we're already there, but like replacing light fixtures with LED compatible lights and things like that? What does that look like from an infrastructure standpoint?
So I know just enough to be dangerous enough to answer this question. So we have been working on this as a district. We've taken a couple of summers and replaced them as it made sense. I know we did basically the entire middle school a couple summers ago. We do have a proposal from a company that would come in and do all the rest of our buildings. Obviously, Greenville Park, the new additions are all up-to-date energy efficient LED, but the other buildings that still, I do believe, obviously the high school, and that's a bigger conversation about what makes sense there. But I think the elementaries pretty much are remaining, and then the high school. So what we do have a proposal. It is not inexpensive, unfortunately. The cost payback, from what we understand, is pretty positive, but it is a big upfront commitment. So we do have a quote from a company that would come in and do all of the remaining lights. And I want to say it was just under $1 million. And so that is something that we're looking at. Are there grants or other things that we can help offset that? But otherwise, for the meantime, we're looking at kind of bite-sized chunks where it makes sense in our capital budget and our LTFM budget to do so. I want to say it's actually switching to LED. I'm not confident is allowed under our LTFM dollars. I do think we have to use our operating capital dollars to do that, but don't quote me on that one 100%. But right now that's the strategy is kind of, do we have the staff capacity? Can we get the actual light fixtures and things that we need to do so? And we've been using our in-house master electrician and the summer electrician intern or apprentice, I think is the actual term, to help kind of facilitate that. And that's, it's time consuming. So you can only do so much with those people.
Do we have a sense of what the time for return on investment be for those, like 5 year?
I want to say it was 7. But I haven't looked at that report recently. So
Yeah, I wonder if there's with the
And we
Inflation
can come back with
Reduction
another
Act, if
report
there's
too.
mhm.
Some opportunities there for
Yep.
something to look into.
Yep.
Thanks.
Sorry about, we can come back with a more detailed report about the LED as well. I apologize for interrupting.
Good. Any other questions or comments, Jenny?
Thank you, Val. Again, I just have a question. I was curious to know if we would have to be implementing any additional training for some staff, especially the buildings and grounds staff. It looks like they're going to be receiving a lot more duties on a day-to-day basis just to verify some of these, especially with the temperature systems and the lighting and things and the power being shut off and things like that. That would have to happen on a day-to-day basis. So I was just wondering if those new duties, if there's going to be any type of training that has to be implemented and how we go about that.
So to the best of my knowledge, I don't believe so. My understanding, again, our previous director of buildings and grounds obviously crafted a lot of this language, is that these are kind of things that we're already mostly doing. And so the staff are trying to keep things in these ranges, but this is going to tighten it up because it does vary from building to building. So I think the staff understand the systems and know how to use them and set them appropriately, but they've never had an actual explicit guideline about where it needs to be, if that makes sense. So if one staff is cold and one staff is warm, they're tweaking all of those things, as needed basically right now without kind of that structure. So this will help provide some consistency across the district. So I'm not anticipating training. Certainly if that comes up, there are different opportunities that we can provide for staff to do that. So I hope that answers your question, but that is to the best of my knowledge.
No, that was perfect. Thank you.
Yeah.
And then I also just can't help but piggyback off of Ben's comment just regarding the potential for new energy efficient lighting. I know it sounds like you have done a tremendous amount of work already researching a lot of that, and I have heard a lot about that too. But my concern is that I know that there's also some potential for remodeling in some of the other schools, especially the high school, things like that have been put on the table. And so if you go ahead with, replacing all of the lighting and things like that into more energy efficient, of course, that makes sense, especially if it's only a 5 or 7 year, I think you said, capture on that investment. But then what happens when, you go and remodel a school or build a new school and then you have to just absorb that loss. So has that been thought about or considered also?
Yes, that's definitely been the forefront of the conversation. Anytime we talk about the high school and doing anything to it, is what really makes sense. Is this level of investment worthwhile depending on what would happen 2, 5, 10 years from now? So we are always having that conversation. I I would say we would do all the other buildings prior to doing the high school, just to allow us that time frame, unless we were truly going to look at a kind of one-stop shop, one and done with all of the buildings, then that's obviously a conversation we would bring to the board.
Okay, thank you.
Yep.
Yeah, anyone else comment or question? Okay, thank you, Val. I just have one or two questions for you. Do you plan to come back next year with a report on what the realized savings were? I know you can see the cost now, so.
Yep, absolutely.
And then on the heating and cooling, is it from classroom to classroom or wing to wing in a facility like the high school? So are teachers reporting pretty much consistent heating and air in a wing, or is it classroom by classroom that those changes are happening?
So I'm not 100% sure because I don't see that on a day-to-day basis. So I'm not confident on how that's happening right now. My guess at the high school is it's probably a little bit wing to wing just because of the layout of that particular facility. But I think putting it in, I think the range is 68 to 72, for heating. I think that's a reasonable range that we should be targeting. And certainly if there's other factors at play that we, hadn't considered, we'll look at that at that time. But that would be my assumption, but I really am not sure.
Okay, thank you.
Yep.
Something we know about the high school is that it is not temperate, right? There's a lot of differentiation there for sure.
Okay, would you like to move into the item F, the proposed 23-24 general fund budget?
Gladly.
And there's no action required at this meeting.
No. All right. So I am going to present the 23-24 proposed general fund budget. So as you are very well aware, enrollment drives about 70% of our total revenue. So it's a very large component of our budget and something we monitor closely. So when I have been looking at enrollment, as you know, we're in declining enrollment. 22-23 school year was our 4th year of consecutive decline. For 23-24, we are projecting what I will call stable enrollment. It is technically higher, but very, very minimally. So going from 4,198 adjusted pupil units to 4,216. So very minimal, but stable is stable, and I will take the win any way we can get it. After that, the model is still projecting a decline. So I did include the 24-25 school year on there, so you can see that that is still the anticipated trend. So for revenue assumptions, what we're looking at right now for this budget that I'm proposing, I did include a 4% increase in the basic revenue. Most of the models we've heard from the state are 4% or 5% in the next year. And so feel pretty confident that we're going to see some dollars there. So that looks will be 7,138 per adjusted pupil unit. The enrollment again is stable, so we're including that in that projection. Special education is always interesting and challenging. So we saw a decline for 22-23 because the revenue is based on prior year expenditures. And so this year's budget saw a decline because the fiscal 21 numbers due to the pandemic were lower. And so 21-22 was mostly back to normal. So we're anticipating that increase to kind of flow through, if that makes sense. Compensatory is also rebounding to the pre-pandemic level. So as you might recall, we saw a pretty significant decline with our compensatory funding because it is based on our concentration of free and reduced applications and approvals. The state of Minnesota is doing a pilot this year to, I don't want to say auto qualify, but it's basically sort of auto qualifying with some boundaries, any students that qualify for Medicaid. And that has rebounded our numbers and actually probably exceeded pre-pandemic levels in terms of who qualifies for free and reduced lunch. And so that revenue is, I think, projected to be about 1.3 million. And at our lowest point during the pandemic, it was about 600,000. So that was a nice rebound that's helping our projection for next year. Property taxes. This was presented to you in December. So this is hands down my favorite part of the budget because I already know what it's going to be. I can just put it in and it's ready to go and I know it's right. So the biggest, just to refresh your memory, the biggest increases there was the operating referendum inflationary increase. So we saw a pretty substantial increase in that inflation, which allowed for some significant dollar increase there. Federal sources has been a little bit of a roller coaster the past few years. So you'll see in the upcoming slide, almost all of our pandemic related funds will be spent by the end of this fiscal year. Again, the vast majority we have used for budget stabilization, which is why they're mostly spent at this point. We are projecting all of our, what I will say, normal, consistent federal programs. So Title I, 2, 3, and 4, special ed, all of those are projected to be consistent. And we are still spending down the summer out of school time federal program. So that's kind of what's still hanging out there, which is what's funding the community school model at Bridgewater and Spring Creek for the next year. Local sources, this includes all of our standard stuff and then an increase through our budget reduction process for the participation fees, which I believe were included in the board packet, what that recommendation is, and the increase for entry fees of $2 per participant. And so those were all part of the recommendation for reducing the budget. It also includes some revenue for the sale of iPads, an estimate of what that will be. Again, we won't know until we actually go through that process. The rates can vary widely, and the condition of the iPads really drives the amount of money that we would get for that. So, but there is some revenue budgeted for that as well. So I included on here, sorry if this is a little hard to see, but I wanted to include 3 years of audit results, just because we've had quite a bit of fluctuation over the past couple of years in a variety of ways. The current revised budget, and then what I'm proposing for the 23-24 school year. So again, property taxes, like I said, you see a nice increase in that due to the inflationary increase for the referendum. State sources, again, a 4% increase is a significant increase on that per pupil funding. The per pupil funding, just for reference, is about 55% of our total revenue. So that's a very large component. And with our stable enrollment for the next year, you can see us basically realizing all of those dollars rather than kind of it offsetting some of the declining enrollment. Federal sources, you see the big dip. Again, 1.7 is a little bit more than the 1.4 we had been at historically, but again, that's including that summer and out of school time programming. And local sources, you can see an increase. Again, there's lots of things that go into that: donations, activity fees, MA revenue. There's a bunch of different things, but the two biggest changes are really the activity fees and the entry fees and the sale of the iPads. 3 things, sorry. So about 60.9 million is what I am proposing for general fund revenue for the 23-24 school year. And just for the activity fees, I know it's at the back of my presentation, but I want to talk about it now just because I'm talking about revenue. So the proposal that's included will be brought back at the next meeting for approval. It includes a 50% increase across the board, 612 for all the activities. So you can see, I think I have on there a couple of years worth of rates and then what we're recommending. We did have a conversation with both the middle school and the high school activities departments about strength training. Prior to this year, there was no fee at the high school for strength training. And the fee at the middle school, I think, was $25 per, they have it, I think, for 3 quarters, you can enroll in it. They saw a pretty significant decline in enrollment at the high school. And again, this was the first year that they charged a fee. And so there was some concern that if we continued to increase that another 50%, that there would be limited to no participation. And so we matched both the high school and the middle school. So now they're the same. But we are having some conversations about what that looks like, because that just operates differently. It's not just one season. It's, different at the high school and middle school. And so we're talking through what that looks like, but that's the only caveat in that document is those were held at $80, just for some concerns about the enrollment and registration. I think that's all my notes I had on that. But certainly if we have questions, we can go through those at the end as well. For expenditures, obviously salary and benefits are our biggest component of our expenditure budget. So we are going to be negotiating with the Northfield Education Association starting here in about 2 weeks. And so that will drive a significant dollar amount for our salary budget. We do know where all the 16 other contracts landed. And so those settled increases are included as part of this projection. And then the other thing you'll notice when we get into some of the detail is all of the priority-based budgeting impacts are accounted for in this budget. For benefits, I would say most things were consistently rolled forward. We are going to have another 0.21% increase in TRA. This is our 5th and hopefully final year of an increase. They have increased it 0.25% for the employer contribution for the last 5 years. So that's a 2.3% increase in TRA on top of the salary percentage. So TRA is a percent of the salary. And so this is 2.3 on top of our 3%. We're already, 3%, 4%, 2%, whatever we decide on in negotiations and per contract. This doesn't include an account for the increase in the health contribution. It assumes a slight increase next January, assuming that we're going to continue to keep pace and want to keep increasing that fund balance for our self-insurance. And then we did see a pretty substantial increase in our work comp premium, about $50,000. And so that is included in this budget as well. For non-salary and other operational expenditures, transportation, we are in a 4-year contract with Benjamin Bus. So that was a known increase for our base cost. Utility expenditures, the dollar amount is increasing, but we're obviously hoping to offset that with some either revenue generation or just decreased usage. And so I have a slight increase built in, but not a significant increase. We did see some really significant jumps in expenditures in the last 2 years. That appears to be leveling out right now, but I did include a slight increase just to help balance that. I do believe we've talked about the property liability insurance increase at this meeting before, but our rates all stayed the same, but our building values increased by $62 million. So our rate we pay was on an additional $62 million. So that was projected to be about a $50,000 increase in our property liability insurance. We actually chose to increase our deductible from $5,000 to $20,000, I think, or $25,000. And that saved about $28,000 of that. So we saw about a $23,000 increase there. And then again, there's a variety of items that were approved in the priority-based budget reduction that go throughout all of these different categories. The fund balance goal, the new fund balance goal is 14%. And I did include this with our newly recommended calculations. So our total general fund expenditures less operating capital, long-term facilities maintenance, our scholarship funds, and our student activity funds. Again, all of these items are restricted. They have their own revenue source, and they were things that were scholarship and student activities were added to the general fund. That was never part of the general fund until 2 or 3 years ago now. And again, operating capital and LTFM are restricted and not allowed to go negative. And they also have more variability. So this is expenditures by program. I'm showing you the total expenditures in two different ways. 59.7 is the total expenditures that I'm looking at. This is showing by program. So what are we, where are we spending the money? Is it administration? Is it special ed, sites and buildings? So these are all categories that are required by the Minnesota Department of Ed and how we present our expenditure data to the state. And so obviously you will see this across the state. Most are declining. You will see, obviously we have cut $6 million in the last 2 years. So this is a little different than my typical budget explanations, because most of the time I'm saying things were consistent from year to year and we, increased salaries. This is different because there are a lot of different components that are building this budget this time. So obviously regular instruction you'll see is going, is less than the current year. That feels obvious because that is where the bulk of the reductions are for this year. Special ed, I would like to point out, has a very slight increase. That team has worked really hard over the past year to be creative, to not add staff where it wasn't necessary or to reallocate staffing. And this projection includes the potential of increased positions. I think it's 1.8 FTE, but there's a reduction of some educational assistant positions. And so all of that balancing out and only projecting to be $300,000 more, I thought was very impressive. So wanted to point that out. Just for reference, pupil support includes transportation. So there are a handful of things in there. Sites and buildings obviously includes utilities and all the buildings and grounds. The vocational instruction is a super slight decline, and that's a salary thing, a salary benefit thing. But otherwise, I think the rest is fairly consistent. But if you have specific questions, I'm happy to talk through that. Capital outlay, just for reference, is anything that is considered equipment. So in our audit report, that is pulled out separately. And so I pull it out separately here just so that there's consistent presentation of the data between what you're hearing me say and what you hear the auditor say. That way it makes sense and the language is the same. Expenditures by object. So this is instead of where we are spending, what are we spending the dollars on? Is it staffing? Is it benefits? Is it supplies, dues and memberships? And again, capital outlay is the same, but just pulled out for presentation purposes because that number can fluctuate pretty significantly. So it provides a little more consistent year over year analysis of the other ones. So salaries, again, obviously that is decreasing because we have been in budget reduction for the last 2 years. The benefits is increasing slightly. Again, this is a pretty complex puzzle that we're putting together. We have less staff and FTE and salaries, and we have several statutory benefits that are a percentage based on that salary. We have other things like work comp, TRA that are having increases. And so all of that together is basically showing it being flat, which is a good place to be. Purchase services includes any kind of contracted service. Transportation is included in here. There's several technology things that are included in here. So again, most of these areas are declining just because that's where we've been. Supplies, that's pretty self-explanatory. Dues and memberships includes the scholarships, the student activities, and then any actual dues and memberships that we're paying throughout the district. So there's a couple of things in there that's going to be very consistent year over year. And then the capital outlay, that is declining just because we have less capital projects planned for next year due to the funding. So taking all of those and kind of condensing it down into a summary level, revenue over expenditures, we're looking at about 60.9 million of revenue and 59.7 million of expenditures. So a surplus of about 1.2 million, which I just can't tell you how grateful I am to see a positive number pulling this budget together. While there was a lot of hard work that went into that, it still was the right thing to do to make sure we are financially sustainable for the long term. So our beginning fund balance, again, the last fund balance that we know for sure is the 21-22. We ended with about just over 15 million. So we are projecting that to roll forward for 22-23, and assuming that my budget is accurate for 22-23 with about a $1.8 million spend down, we'll be starting 23-24 with about 13.3 million, and then increasing that, assuming all things are going as I plan. Restricted is all of the, exactly as it sounds, anything that is restricted by the state or by the district. So we have about $5.5 million operating capital, LTFM. There's a small amount for teacher development evaluation. There's some assigned funds for a variety of things. All of those include in that total, which leaves our unassigned at about, projecting to be at about well, actually just shy of $9 million at the end of 23-24. And with the new calculation, and I did go back and retroactively fix them so it was apples to apples, because that would have drove me crazy. Projecting to end about 15.03% at the end of next year. So slightly above the board's goal. Again, I feel the need to emphasize that it's dependent on finishing the 22-23 school year as planned. There are always things that can happen that mean it might be slightly different, but assuming that it is the way I'm anticipating, we'll be ending above the board goal. And hopefully the other thing I didn't mention in the revenue is I do not have any revenue included here for the special ed cross subsidy aid. So assuming that the state comes in and does do something there, that will add to this, which will increase that number. Again, as Matt has said many, many times, this is back pay. We are using this to help be sustainable in the long term. We do not want to come back and do budget reductions year over year. That's not a good place for anybody to be. And so our goal would be to be able to sustain this for the next several years. I think that was all I had. So that's a lot of information. So I will gladly answer any questions you have about this, the activity fees, any component of the budget.
Thank you, Val. Excellent report. Appreciate you. Board members, do you have any question? Over here. Okay, Robert.
Well, thank you, Val, and how wonderful to finally be seen a year here without a deficit. No more of those commas there.
Yes.
Perfect.
Parentheses. Yep.
Earlier you provided, and it's nice that we're now comfortable enough to be able to be pretty positive that 4% will be coming on an increase on the basic formula. Earlier, you were able to provide some estimate of what we might be looking at on the expense side of the legislature hasn't finished. We've got 2 more weeks there, but there are some big ticket items there that might also impact it. Do we have a sense of where that might be for us right now?
So I think it depends on what you think is going to potentially pass. I do have a spreadsheet that I have created that tracks both the House and the Senate, what their revenue proposal is, and then associated expenditures. Off the top of my head, I would say the big ones are the paid family leave. I think they're looking at like a 0.35% payroll tax. The last thing I read was a 0.7% payroll tax, but it was shared by the employee and the employer. So that'll be interesting. By the last number I had was 0.35 for the district, and that was about 137,000, if I'm remembering correctly, for my estimate for next year. The unemployment is the other big one that is very concerning to me. That proposal is to allow basically unemployment for any non-licensed staff that would not typically have hours in the summer if they have a school year position. That I believe was about $607,000 that I had estimated. They're currently not proposing to allow us to use our unemployment levy. So currently, and as long as I've been doing this, we've had an unemployment levy where we've been able to levy 100% of our unemployment costs. Historically, that's been maybe 10,000. So 600,000 is really significant. And that is not including any kind of cost related to summer programming. So we do have some pretty significant concerns about being able to fund, or not fund, but to staff our summer programming, because our summer programming is not 7 hours a day, it's 4 hours a day in most programs, and whether or not the state will consider that to be comparable to their school year employment. So we have some pretty significant concerns about that, and the fact that it's a very substantial dollar amount. I do not have $600,000 budgeted in there, but you can see that that eats up half of our current surplus or proposed surplus. Those are the big ones. Are you looking at my spreadsheet? Are there any other significant ones?
I think that you've hit the biggest ones. And there are just some others that are either there is funding that is proposed, but it isn't quite the amount of money that it would cost to run the program. So for example, you heard our district youth council talk about providing period products in restrooms for students. There is a bill that is in the omnibus bill that would pay for some of that, but it's only a little bit more than 50% of the cost. There's some other things around, for example, personal finance required course changing when civics would be required. Those are things that we aren't able yet to know how will those be implemented by MD, what kind of curriculum or materials we will need to purchase additional training. And again, we want to come back to a lot of these things that we're talking about are things that we support in concept. It is just about making sure that we do a pay-as-you-go program so that when you are doing new requirements, that you also provide all of the funding to cover those. So Val has highlighted the largest ones, and the omnibus bills are getting worked out this week. So we'll know more later this week. Hopefully we'll know more by the time we present to you in 2 weeks.
Yep.
Okay, Ben.
Thanks, Val. And the special education cross subsidy, if that was at 47, 48%, what would that look like in terms of net revenue?
I want to say 2.3,
2.2.
2.2 million. Thank you for having that
House.
spreadsheet open.
Yeah.
Yeah, so about $2.2 million of additional revenue.
And that's not, that was.
No.
Okay, thank you.
Yep.
Anyone else? Okay, thank you so much, Val.
Thank you.
Okay, now we have the head custodian agreement modifications.
Yeah, so in your packet, I have a narrative just talking about the challenges that we've had, specifically recruiting and retaining a high school head custodian. So people know, I think in general, what a head custodian does, but I really want to just outline. So head custodians are just essential to every school. They're not only responsible for the cleaning of the facility, which I think most people primarily associate with that, but they are also responsible for the operations of the facility, questions that people just asked around the energy policy. They are helping implement the building controls, the computerized building controls. They're making sure that they're doing maintenance, preventative maintenance, maintenance that because of things that have broken, everything on the grounds and inside of the facility. So a head custodian is essential to the day-to-day operations of the building, from everything of making sure that the heat is on to that the snow is cleared, that the custodial crew that they supervise are having an efficient and effective way to clean our schools to make sure that we're putting our best foot forward to students. Due to the size of the high school, and just the sheer number of public events that are hosted there, the high school head custodian takes on a whole nother level of importance. And this position has been vacant for most of the year. So when Jim Pash retired from the school district as our district maintenance coordinator, 40 years with the district, our awesome high school head custodian, Adam Karsko, was put into that role. That role sat vacant for several months. We were able to hire a qualified individual mid-year. That person lasted less than 90 days and said, this is not worth it for me to do this. Person who had been retired, and I think he had a little different vision of what the high school head custodian position was compared to what it really is on a day-to-day basis, especially in the winter. We've done a significant evaluation, looking at other schools, looking at what are the reasons that we haven't seen a tremendous amount of people from inside the district seeking to move up into these roles. And this is one of those cases where it comes down to money, and that there just is not enough of a differential between being an elementary head custodian, the middle school head custodian, and the high school head custodian. So as you can see, right now, an elementary head custodian, every head custodian gets a base rate hourly pay. Then they get a building stipend to recognize the difference of each facility. The elementary, the stipend is $3,500 per year, or $1.68 per hour. The middle school right now is $5,000 per year, $2.40 per hour. And right now, you only get $250 more to be the head custodian of the high school than you do of the middle school. And so we think that that is partially, probably most significantly responsible for the difficulty in filling the role. So former director of buildings and grounds, Cole Nelson, myself, Molly Bieselman, our HR director, Val and I, we have looked at a number of different pieces. We used a variety of different tools to try to have a data-based support for how do we differentiate that salary. We looked at per square footage, right? And taking the elementary rate, dividing it out by the average square foot, multiplying, and it's not perfect because, you know, you're not just taking into account the square footage of the building, but you're also taking into account of the grounds, the complexity of the public events, the sheer number of public events, and then trying to have a reasonably round number in terms of a logical differentiation. We've landed on recommending that we increase the high custodian high school building stipend to $13,500 per year, the middle school to $8,500 per year, keeping the elementary at $3,500 per year. Now, that total increase to the budget would be around $13,530, but we've already saved $26,000 this year because we have not filled that position, and there's been a savings in that understaffing. And so again, the final analysis is many times being able to recruit and retain is about more than money. In this case, it's fairly clear that the money is the driving factor. We do believe this is one of the few areas where we have a true career pathway in the district, from someone starting as an evening custodian all the way to a head custodian. And this is this last part of that career ladder. There just isn't enough differentiation to encourage people to take on that additional responsibility. So we're bringing this proposal to you tonight. We are not asking you to vote on it tonight, but we're bringing it to you because this is a problem that we need to solve. Not having we do have an interim head custodian right now. Joe Greenwood is helping us out. He does not want the position long-term, but he's willing to help us out until we're able to finally fill it. But every day that we don't have this, it is a continued liability for us. So we appreciate your consideration of the proposal.
Thank you so much. Are there any questions or comments? Robert?
Matt, knowing that this is one of these, the difficulty we've had filling the high school head custodian role, is this one of the times when would there be a benefit for the board moving more quickly on this if we took action on this today?
If you ask our director of community education or our high school principal, they will say, please, right? Because there is a liability. Even if we wait 2 weeks out, right, which is what the current schedule would be. If you think about 2 weeks out, we're 2 weeks out then from graduation, about 2 weeks out from the end of the school year, when thankfully we don't have a lot of summer projects happening this year. But if you just think about what it takes to clean the high school, you know, to the condition that it's in over the summer to be ready for the fall, having a couple of extra weeks would certainly be helpful if that was the board's prerogative.
If that's the case, I'd like to make a motion that we add this to as an action item.
Second that.
Okay, second by Jeff. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Okay, we will move that to items for individual action later tonight. Okay, any other comments or questions? Okay, our final item in reports is the operations and strategic plan update.
Yep, I just have a couple of items here. One, I wanted to highlight graduation rates. The graduation rates were released by the Minnesota Department of Education just after our last board meeting. Actually, the embargo was lifted at 6 a.m. That Tuesday morning. So I was able to talk about it on my regular KYMN show. But I just want to share with you that, the 4-year graduation rate is one of the systems indicators that we look at. We know that students graduating in 4 years, there's a whole host of advantages that they have as they move forward. We also know that not every student is destined to graduate in 4 years, right? So we have a number of different supports, including an award-winning area learning center program, adult basic education, all of the things that we can do to make sure that everyone graduates, even if it's not in that 4-year time frame. But a 4-year graduation rate is something that is important to take a look at because it's a systems indicator. When we take a look at Northfield High School, we are above 95% for the 6th consecutive year. So 95.9% of Northfield High School students graduated on time. And we also know that when we disaggregate our demographic groups, we know that Minnesota has had one of the worst achievement gaps in the nation. And that includes graduation rates. And so when we take a look at our largest demographic group that we study, that is our Hispanic student demographic group. And I'm very proud to report to you for the 5th consecutive year, the Hispanic demographic group's rate has surpassed 90%, with 94.7% of our Northfield High School Hispanic students graduating on time. And that beats the state average by 25 percentage points. And so the real hard work that has been done by Torch and by instructional services and all of the teachers, the staff, the students themselves who have worked incredibly hard, and of course, all of our parents who are great partners. These are really good results. I read an article in the Owatonna paper talking about the Big 9 graduation rates, which they believe that they characterize that as Northfield being the envy of the Big 9. So you hit above 95%, you are going to have some differentiation up and down a little bit each year. When you're a much smaller school, you will see some smaller schools hit 100%. That's very difficult for us to hit 100%. But we do range between that 95 and 98.5% each year. And so we're very proud of that. We're proud of the hard work that people have done to get there. So that is the graduation rate report. High level legislative update. I'm not going to spend a lot of time getting it unless board members want to get into all of it. We are at crunch time. So we have been working incredibly hard over the last few months to make sure that we stay plugged in. We have between 12 and 18 people who are showing up to our legislative action committee meetings every other Saturday at 9 a.m. People have been engaged. They are activating their networks to make sure that what we are looking for from the legislature is heard. One member of our committee reported to us that they impacted 75 people sending something to the legislature. So even though it's 12 to 18 people every other week, the amplification is pretty substantial. So we just know that they're working really hard to determine how do they come to consensus in the conference committee stage. Both the House and the Senate have approved their education omnibus bills. They are working out the details. You can watch those on YouTube, and it's interesting just to see the very technical way that they're taking this up. The big decisions are to be made, this week. So we talked about special ed cross subsidy. Senate first year out is 1.8 million. House is at about 2.2. So those are the kinds of differences that we're looking at. Of course, the one that I think that I am the most focused on is the tying or indexing the basic formula to inflation. It's in the House, not the Senate. That would be a substantial improvement for all school districts in Minnesota. So we're looking as we continue to try to resolve the differences in the bills. We continue to work at advocating even at this late stage. And we're hopeful that they will complete their work by the time they're required to adjourn on May 22nd. So with that, I'd be happy to answer any questions about that update.
Thank you very much. Questions or comments? Oh, yes, Ben.
I was going to say, I'd like to always ask, what surprises you? That graduation statistic was impressive. I mean, I think that's certainly something to call out, especially looking at, the disaggregated data like you were talking about. That's something that the district should definitely be proud of. I learned something this evening. Thank you.
All right, very well. We're on item 6. The consent grouping. As a reminder, there were some personnel items in the table file added to the consent grouping. Is there anything anyone would like to pull from the grouping for separate consideration? Okay, is there a motion to approve the consent grouping? By Amy. Okay. By Jenny. All those in favor of approving the consent grouping, say aye. Aye. Opposed? Okay, motion carries. All right, item 7 is our number 7 is our items for individual action, and we have 5 items for action and a resolution. First, we have the revised 2022-23 community education budget. This was presented at the April 24th meeting by Director Aaron Bailey and also by Director Murdestor. And we'll take a motion and then we can discuss. Is there a motion to approve the revised 22-23 community education budget as presented? Moved by Robert. Okay, second. Second by Corey. Do we have somebody presenting tonight?
No, we just,
No?
we included the presentation from the last meeting in the file, and Val and I can answer any questions. Heavy on the Val, can answer any questions about the community ed revised budget.
Okay. Are there any questions from the board members? No. Okay, there is a motion and a second. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion passes. Next, we have the special education staffing. Is there a motion to approve the addition of 1.8 licensed special education FTE at a cost of 198,000 salary and benefits, with approximately 55% of salary reimbursed through the special education revenue for a net cost of 89,100. Moved by Ben, second. By Amy. Are there any additional comments that we?
And we do have Cheryl and Sarah here if anyone did have any comments or questions about that.
Okay. We have a motion and a second. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Okay, motion passes. Next, we have a modification to the academic award parameters. Is there a motion to authorize the high school administration to issue an academic award to all high school students who meet the grade point average and other requirements as outlined in the high school handbook? Okay, moved by Corey, second. By Robert. Dr. Himmel, do you want to make any comments on this?
Very briefly, we just did find out that we have not had anybody ask us about this for a number of years, but there was a provision in the high school handbook around academic recognition that you had to take so many courses at Northfield High School, at least the first semester of your senior year, to qualify for academic recognition. We think this is a holdover from a time when PSEO might not have been as popular with administration and boards over time. I want to remind people students who do PSEO are eligible for athletics. They're eligible to participate in our play and everything else. And so it just didn't seem to align with our values to deny them an opportunity for academic recognition. So this motion is to grant an exception to that part. So these 3 students who would be eligible are able to be recognized later this week.
Are there any questions or comments? No. Okay, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Okay, motion passes. Next, we have a resolution proposing to place tenured licensed staff on unrequested leave of absence. I'll take a motion and then we can have discussion. Is there a motion to adopt the resolution related to the proposed placement of the listed tenured teachers on unrequested leave of absence effective at the end of the 22-23 school year? And do note that 2 of them will be given a new contract for the next academic year. Okay, moved by Jenny, second. By Ben. Okay, Dr. Himmel, do you want to make any comments?
This is really the last stage of our implementation of the budget reduction process that you approved last month. And so these are tenured staff. Again, a couple of them are counselors who are they're part of that the number of contracted days reduction. So not losing counselors, they're just losing a few days. And then the remainder of the folks will go on the unrequested leave, use the unrequested leave language and have recall rights under those provisions of the NEA contract.
Okay. Are there any questions? Okay, seeing none, Anita, will you facilitate a roll call vote?
Butler,
Aye.
Coleman,
Aye.
Gurwitz,
Aye.
Gonzalez, George,
Aye.
Miller,
Aye.
Nelson,
Aye.
Quinnell,
Aye.
Okay, resolution passes. Thank you, Anita. Finally, we have the head custodian agreement modification. Is there a motion to approve the changes to the building responsibility stipends for the head custodians? Okay, moved by Jeff, second. By Ben. Board members, do you have any questions or comments further? No? All right, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion passes. Okay, item number 8 is items for information. We have the National Honor Society Senior Induction Ceremony. The board is invited to attend the National Honor Society Senior Induction Ceremony scheduled for Tuesday, May 23rd, 8 p.m. at the high school auditorium. There'll be a brief program awarding of membership certificates to qualifying seniors and a reception in the lower cafeteria. Number 9, are there any further items? Okay. Number 9 is our future meetings. Monday, May 22nd, 6 p.m. It's a regular board meeting here in this district boardroom. And then June 12th, 6 p.m., a regular board meeting again in the district boardroom. That is all the business that we have tonight. Is there a motion to adjourn? Moved by Jeff. Okay, is there a second? By Amy. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Okay, motion carries. We are adjourned. Thank you.